Hello! Welcome to Changeling Cast, the podcast dedicated to reading and dissecting urban fantasy, paranormal, and speculative romance series. I'm your host Mara from the YouTube channel Books Like Woe, and this season we are making our way through Nalini Singh's Psy Changeling series. So today we are talking about Mind to Possess by Nalini Singh, which is the fourth full book in the Psy Changeling series. And I will confess to you guys, I'm not sure how this episode's going to go because this is the first of the books, or even just the stories we're talking about, where I really feel quite conflicted about the book we're talking about. I really enjoy parts of this book, but I have to say the front half of this book is really tough for me. And I think it shows its age in a way that I don't think the books up until this point have. I'm not sure that a book like this would be written in a series like this today, and I'll unpack that a little bit more later, but suffice it to say, in terms of my overall impressions of this book, I think that it is one that I like the back half of it quite a bit, but the front half of it is a real struggle for me. And this is the first book I will say that I'm not sold fully by the story that there is a transition into a long-term loving relationship. Like by the end, basically, I just don't buy the progression. So I buy it at the very end, but the transition itself, I just didn't feel like was fully effective. So anyway, I also, before we get into this, I want to give some really strong content warnings on this one, that this book deals with sexual violence and violence against children extensively. So both if you've not read this book, know that, but also if that's not something you want to listen to a podcast about, I really understand that, so I just want to give you that warning up front. And actually, because of some of those elements, I don't know that I'm going to go into as much detail about some of the plot elements of this book, because frankly, this is supposed to be fun for me, and it's not super fun for me to dwell on some of the kind of underlying plot elements here. But with all that being said, I feel like I'm not selling this particular episode very well because I'm so ambivalent, but such is life. There's very few series where every single book I think is just flawless. And this to me is not one of the stronger books in the series because of the sort of weak opening to this particular one. So with all that being said, we'll start with a plot synopsis, then we'll get into some of the themes and my overall thoughts, ratings, etc. So this book, we're back with the leopards again. So if you'll recall, in Caressed by Ice, we took a brief detour over to the Snow Dancer wolf pack. Now we are back with Dark River, the leopard pack. And this is an interesting book because this is the first one where one of our main characters is not a Psy. So that is definitely a new first step in the main books of the series, that we have a leopard who is actually a half leopard. His mother was human, his father was a leopard, and a human. And, well, we'll go there in the plot. Eventually we find out there's a little more to her than meets the eye, but she is human. And our characters are Clay, who we have met in previous books. He is one of Lucas's sentinels, so he is a senior member of the Dark River Pack, and he has been very kind of remote or aloof. Like Sasha and Faith have made comments about how they have some level of worry or concern for him because he seems so emotionally cut off. So he is our hero, and our heroine is Talon. I'm gonna call her Tally because that's just, I don't know, that's kind of how I think of her, and that is Clay's nickname for her. So the setup here is, well, there's two main things happening. We have a micro plot with Clay and Tally, where they're both, they're having a love story, but also doing an investigation. And then the macro plot of this is with the Psy again. And this is back, if you'll recall, in Caressed by Ice, we found out about this new protocol that they are trying to implement, which would basically turn the Psy into a hive mind. So those are kind of the three threads of the book. We've got the romance, we've got this romantic suspense plot, and I will say of the book so far, I know I mentioned somewhat Caressed by Ice read quite like a romantic suspense. This one very much reads like a romantic suspense and also has a very familiar sort of romance archetype within the romantic suspense genre, which is basically a case causes two previous lovers to kind of run back into each other because of what's going on in the investigation. So we'll start with the kind of micro plot elements and they maybe circle back to the macro plot, because the macro plot was what really worked for me in this particular book, and also the investigation they're working on. The romance I'm a little iffy on, so we'll start with that and then we can end on a little bit more of a positive note. So in terms of the romance, this is a second chance romance trope because Tally and Clay knew each other as children. Clay was, I believe, 5 or 6 years older than Tally, and Tally was an orphan, so she was in the foster care system, but they knew each other as children. They had a very strong immediate bond. As the book goes along, we come to realize that probably Clay recognized Tally as his mate subconsciously very early on, so they had an incredibly strong connection, even from their young years. Clay had a difficult home life situation insofar as he did not have a father around, and his mother was very kind of frail and put Clay in the position of being her caretaker, basically. Clay, I will mention, is described as being kind of racially ambiguous because his mother was Egyptian. We will circle back to this point later, but just know that he is kind of presents as not Caucasian, whereas Tally is described as being white. And Tally, like I said, she's in the foster care system. And what we quickly come to find out is that Tally's foster parents were incredibly abusive to her. And actually, prior to her, they basically were serial killers. And she was going to be their next victim. But prior to killing these young girls, I believe on their 8th birthday, these girls were abused, and I'll just sort of leave it at that, but it is very dark. Clay finds out about her abuse when she is about to turn 8 and about to become a victim, and his leopard goes wild, and he killed her foster father to protect her in front of Tally, and that is described very brutally, and basically that incident traumatized Tally. That is unpacked as the romance goes along, somewhat in ways that I did not enjoy and somewhat in ways that I did. But basically, Tally is traumatized by this, and then Clay goes to, he's put in juvenile detention until his 18th birthday. And when he gets out, he immediately tries to find Tally, but her social worker tells him that she died in a car accident because Tally asked her social worker to tell him that. So cut to, that's the backstory. Cut to today, Tally is basically a social worker herself for this specific program called the Shine Foundation. And the Shine Foundation helps disadvantaged children or especially gifted children. It gives them like full rides to university, takes care of all of their needs. And she is actually a graduate of that program. After her awful situation, she was relocated to a farm in Iowa where she grew up with this very lovely family, but she's very emotionally cut off because of everything she's experienced. And so she went away to college very early when she was like 16. And now she's a social worker. She works with street kids who are going into the Shine program or who the Shine program are trying to help. And she has had several of her kids or she has friends in the program who've had some of their kids go missing, and then they have turned up dead, and their bodies have been mistreated in very specific ways. So her kid has gone missing, Johnny. He went missing. She knows that he was probably taken by the serial killer or whoever is trying to do this. And so she goes to Clay because she's desperate for help. And she finds out that he's in the area. She's recently moved to San Francisco. She finds out he's there and she goes to him for help. He is obviously shocked because he thought she was dead. And the first half of this book, in terms of the romance, is a lot of Clay getting very angry at Tally for the fact that she is still very afraid of him because of the traumatizing situation that they both found themselves in. Now, they were both children, not trying to, not say that he also could have trauma for this or have complicated emotions, but he is very angry at her. And he gets even more angry when he finds out that she has slept with other men since they saw each other. Now, reminder, she was 8 years old when they were separated, and she's now 28 years old. So he gets extremely angry that she has had sex with other men, and basically is punishing her for it, like emotionally. So as they're working on this case, he is very aggressive with her in a way that, given the fact that he knows that she is afraid of him, I found to be really just like frankly abusive. I didn't enjoy that. I think what it's trying to sell me on is that he is really hurt because, as I said, it becomes clear that his leopard immediately knew when they met when she was like 3 and he was 8 or whatever, that they were going to be mates someday. His leopard he feels betrayal. That's really what it's getting down to. And he is taking that out on her. The problem is that Tally already, like, especially because we're in her point of view, we see that she just blames herself for everything. Like, she's afraid of Clay because of the violence that she saw that night. She also feels incredibly guilty because she feels like she stole part of his life from him because he went to juvie because of what happened. So she feels a lot of guilt. She feels a tremendous amount of shame because she has been sexually promiscuous, or she was for a certain period of her life, because she was trying to punish herself. Anybody who knows anything about childhood sexual abuse knows that that is a very common response. So there's I actually really liked Tally a lot in this book, and I really liked her journey in the sense of it felt very realistic to me, or I was really buying her emotional, the components of her story, her emotional journey, because she feels a lot of shame. She feels like she deserves to be punished. She feels like she's not worthy of being loved. She feels like everybody who loves her will leave her. Like, I really felt for Tally, and therefore the fact that Clay was being what I would describe as abusive towards her and like putting her down, trying to make her feel ashamed, trying to essentially punish her for having a life in the interim between when they were separated. That did not work for me. Now, around the 40 to 50% mark, he does start to really turn things around. Part of what bothers me, though, is that there's this constant reiteration of, like, can you ever forgive me for sleeping with other men? She says it, he thinks it, and I don't know that if this book was being written today, that would be something that would be a part of the equation, because I do feel like we've moved beyond that for the most part in this kind of book. For usually, like, I just don't think we see that all that often in sort of forward-looking romances anymore. And that whole bit really just didn't work for me. I guess I'm kind of poisoning the well with my description here. So let me take a step back. I'll try to be a little bit more just like, here's what happens in the book. So anyway, so that's the dynamic between them. Part of what moves their romance forward is that he comes to understand that she is sick. She believes she is dying because of some kind of brain issue that the doctors have not been able to diagnose, but they have only given her like 6 to 8 months to live. And one of the symptoms of this illness that she has is that she goes into these fugue states where she cannot remember what's happening. She doesn't know what's going on. He accidentally trips her into one of these fugue states, and she starts talking like she's a little girl again. And when she snaps out of it, she doesn't remember what happened. And what Clay comes to understand is that, as I mentioned, just I think her general promiscuity, he comes to understand that she was doing that as a way to punish herself, like the way she talks about sex and really basically the fact that she doesn't see sex as a pleasurable thing really at all. He comes to understand that she was not trying to betray him. Sorry, I'm trying to keep the contempt out of my voice. She was not trying to betray him. She was trying to punish herself. And so he nuances that. And then he also gets, horrified for obvious reasons when he realizes that she's actually had several times where she's almost ended up like going home with people, or where she has gone home with people. She's woken up and not known how she got there. Like, I think he comes to understand that she's not been acting out sexually for funsies, though she's a grown woman. If she wanted to do that, she'd be allowed to. But he realizes that she didn't, he at least consciously acknowledges, like, okay, she didn't do this to betray me. She did this because she was hurting, and or like, this is kind of a part of her both abuse and her physical illness. So we also have this sort of ticking time clock on their romance, because once they sort of make the transition, and as I mentioned in the intro, I think that transition from antagonism between them to pursuing a relationship again, I don't know that I totally bought that transition, but let's just say it happens. And when it happens, Tally is very resistant to making what is between them permanent, because she thinks that she only has a few months left. Whereas Clay knows that they're basically already mated. They already have that bond. It's been there for years. And actually, towards the end of the book, both Faith and Sasha comment on the fact that their bond looks like one that has been there for like decades. They look like an old married couple, kind of, their mating bond, because it has been there since they were both kids. So Tally, though, is not wanting to accept that. She's wanting to kind of be in denial, because she doesn't want Clay to die, basically, when she dies. So that's the romance piece. Now let's kind of rewind and go back. Like, that will get resolved here. I'll wrap it all up at the end. But let's rewind and go back to the investigation piece of the plot. So they enlist the help of a local enforcement agent. So they're not called police in this version of the future. They're called enforcement. And his name is Max Shannon. Max will be a future hero in a book. This is actually really fun, because I feel like we saw a lot of I feel like we saw the protagonist for the next 4 books in this particular entry. It's like, oh, there's that person and that person and that person. So Max is the enforcement agent. He has been working with the Shine Foundation to track down what's happened to all these kids. And he basically reveals to Tally and to Clay that part of what has happened is that when these bodies of these children are recovered, they're missing their brains, which is an odd thing. And then basically, as they kind of are doing more investigation, it becomes more and more apparent that somehow the Psi are involved with these children's disappearance. So the question becomes why? And for a time, they're suspecting, well, maybe the Shine Foundation itself is some sort of front for being able to attack these children, but if so, why? We meet the head of the Shine Foundation. His name is Dev. And again, he will be a protagonist in a future book. But basically, what we come to find out over the course of the book from Dev and from others is that the Shine Foundation is actually a foundation that tries to identify children who are the descendants of the Psi who left the Psinet when silence went into effect. So at the very beginning of the book, we get this little blurb talking about what are called the Forgotten. And the Forgotten are the very small number of Psi who, when silence was implemented, decided that they would not be a part of it, mostly because they had partners who were either changelings or human. And so they left the Psinet and they formed their own version of the Psinet that is called the ShadowNet. And what the Shine Foundation does is try to track down children who are showing different Psi abilities, not usually in the same degree as the Psi in the Psinet have, but they have enough Psi lineage that they have some sort of special gifting, or they have some sort of special need that may need to be addressed. And actually what we come to find out, and this is sort of the wrap-up of Tally and Clay's storyline, is that Tally is the reason she was identified is because she is one of the Forgotten, and she actually has a very small need for biofeedback for her brain. So that is what has been making her sick. It's not like when Sasha and Faith left that they would die without that link, because she doesn't need as much, but she does need some small level of biofeedback. And so when her and Clay finally kind of both accept their mating, which happens the first time that they are sexually intimate, she starts to get the biofeedback she needs, because she stops sort of denying the bond, and she's going to be fine after that. But anyway, we find out that that's what the Shine Foundation is doing. And so the reason that these kids are being killed is that somebody within the Psynet is trying to study their brains and study what the implant for the protocol, tying back to the macro plot, might do to Psi brains. They want to use these children who are not fully Psi and who are street kids, so probably are not gonna, their thought is they won't get as much attention if they go missing. They want to use them to figure out what would happen with the implants. So basically we find out that Tally's kid that she's been trying to track down, Johnny, he is still alive. He's also in this place with this little girl named Noor, and we'll circle back around to the macro plot here in a second, but through reasons or through machinations, they find out where he is. They make a deal with a Psi scientist who is running that facility, and they do get Johnny and Noor back, and Clay and Tally are going to adopt the two of them, and they're going to become a family unto themselves. So that's sort of the micro plot. Well, so part of what we'll talk about with the macro plot, obviously it unfolds in this book, so it is specific to this book, but just getting into sort of the bigger picture stuff. So as I mentioned, the reason that they were being abducted, these children, is that they are moving forward with the plans for Protocol 1. So we do get several points of view with Ashaya, who we met in the last book, or we saw her reference in the last book. She is the main MSI who is in charge of Protocol 1, and she is under the thumb of Ming fucking Laban, who, if you listen to this podcast, you know I hate, but Ming fucking Laban has her trapped working on this project because they are holding her son Keenan hostage. She doesn't believe that this is something that should move forward, but she has no choice but to work on it. However, she knows that if she doesn't do something, both her and Keenan are likely going to be killed at some point when her usefulness is not outweighed by her liability or her unwillingness. So she is looking for an opportunity to slip out from the other side, and really what she's looking for is a way to get Keenan away from the other side. So she is the one who makes a deal for Johnny and for Noor. She helps get them out, and in return, the Dark River Pack agrees that they will get Keenan. They will kidnap Keenan for her. So that's going to be the driver of the 5th book. So that is sort of a preview of coming attractions. Other things that are important for the macro plot, like I said, we find out about this concept of the Forgotten and these other Psi who left the Psynet. The Shadow Net and the Forgotten is an important concept that we will return to later in the series. We also see ongoing machinations within the Psi Council. Caleb Krychek continues to be our kind of main point of view into the Psi Council, and it is interesting. They definitely have a moment where all of the other counselors unconsciously sort of look to him for leadership in a moment and take his word as this is what we're going to do. So there is an important sort of transition moment where we find out that really Caleb is kind of the head counselor at this point. Something else important that happens is that the Ghost, if you will recall him from the previous books, he orchestrates the assassination of a Psi counselor. And actually, it is that assassination and the chaos it causes that allows them to even get Johnny and Noor out. So he arranges the death of Marshall, who, if you'll remember from the earlier episodes, I forgot that he was even still around because he kicks the bucket pretty early on. So Marshall is killed, and in his place, we have Anthony Kirakis coming onto the Psi Council. If you'll recall, he is Faith Nightstar's dad and the head of the Nightstar clan. So we have a new counselor in the mix who will become an increasingly important figure as the books go on. So by the end of the book, in terms of the macro plot, where we're at is that we have the Forgotten and the Shadow Net coming onto the chessboard. We have a new counselor who we've met before. We have ongoing work on the implant for Protocol 1, which would create a hive mind within the Psi. And we also, I think, just have general ongoing increased chaos within the Psynet. Since Sasha and Faith have left, there is just an increase in the amount of discord happening, confusion, and there is a general sense that things are ratcheting up a notch in a way that they haven't publicly, at least people have not been aware of the amount of discord that's going on. There hasn't been this level of sort of animosity since silence was first going into place. So there's just this overall feeling of unrest within the Psynet. And then we still see that we have the changelings continuing to solidify their power base. Oh, I didn't talk about this, but this is also an important step, which is that there is a rat pack. That feels weird. This is not Frank Sinatra. There's a group of rat shifters who are led by, I think his name is Tihan, who live in the kind of like the sewers of San Francisco. That's sort of their territory. And they have long been sort of on the fence about if they were going to align themselves with Dark River. They finally take the step to do that in this book, and they will become important kind of like side players in future books as well. So we have the Dark River pack further kind of consolidating their basis of power in San Francisco. All the while we see, basically, I'm trying to get at, we see the changelings increasing their stability and the Psynet decreasing theirs. That continues to be an ongoing trend. Other just like shout outs, we do get some more time with Mercy in this book, who is one of the Sentinels. She's the only female Sentinel in the Dark River pack, and we find out that she is the liaison with Snowdancer, and she really doesn't like that role because she doesn't like the guy that she has to liaise with. His name is Riley. I'm going to let you draw the conclusions that any well-read romance reader will draw from that. So yeah, like I mentioned, we've got Ashaya coming on the board. Her book is next. That's the 5th one. We've got Mercy, whose book is the 6th one. We've got Max. I think his book is the either 7th or 8th, and then Dev's book is either the 7th or 8th. So we've got like all of our players who are coming up onto the board have been sort of queued up into this particular book. So I feel like that's a pretty good summary of the book as a whole, and I do think I've already sort of tipped my hand at some of my thoughts already, but I will just say I struggle with what to do with this book because there are things I really like in it. At the end of the book, I like even Clay and Tally together. Like, I enjoy their dynamic by the end of this book. I think the road to get there, though, is just really tough for me. While I do really appreciate the exploration of true trauma, and I feel like Tally's experience of that trauma is very realistically rendered, so I appreciate that, but introducing that in the context of the type of romance that is present, for me, it just didn't really work in the first half of this book, so I struggle with how to feel about the book with that being said. With that being kind of the dynamic that's at play. As I mentioned, I do think that this is a true romantic suspense, like one of the most romantic suspensey books we've had so far. So I think that's an interesting kind of element here of really seeing some well-worn tropes, because basically this whole like, oh, we had a falling out, but now I need your help on this case is such a classic of romantic suspense. So I enjoyed sort of the vibes of this one, feeling farther down that road than I think we've seen up until this point. I do appreciate the ongoing exploration of violence and what it does to people. I think that really is quite a theme in these books of violence being something that has a long-term cost. Either violence of a physical nature, which is more what we deal with in this book, but also emotional violence, because I think that's been a lot of what we've seen with the side characters up till this point. But I think we continue to see the ramifications of that emotional violence or emotional abuse that pretty much the entire Psy race has experienced. I also think that this is one of the books that has one of the stronger themes in it of sort of the importance of racial in the terms of this world, but like intercultural community, because one of the things we come to find out towards the end of the book is that part of why we see such specific designations within the Psy today is that they've really kind of, and we've seen this in terms of some of the like genetic contracts that have been arranged, and we've seen that alluded to. They're really almost sort of like, you can think of them almost like purebred dogs that, yes, they have these very specific designations, but that comes with a cost of other kinds of defects. And it also means you're not getting new innovation, because one of the things we find out is that some of these children of the Forgotten who have Psi ancestry, they display designations or powers that are not commonly seen or known. And that's because they've had genetics from the changelings and humans introduced as well. So I think that that's really a kind of important thread in terms of sort of the posture of the series towards the value of interconnectedness among people. I think that's a really telling kind of clue there, as well as the fact that at the very end of the book, in the epilogue, Sasha kind of is looking at the web of stars, and she realizes that there's an increase in the amount of power that's been generated between all of these different people connected in the web of stars. And she realizes it's because Tally is there. And she basically muses that she thinks it's the first time in a very long time, or at least it's the first one we're seeing, where we have a small Psynet, like a small psychic network that has all three races included in it, and how that actually makes everybody in it stronger. So again, I think that that's a very blatant theme in this book, this sort of intercultural or interracial romance and the importance of that. However, on the topic of race, this book does continue kind of uncomfortable language around race. I noted, I think, 3 times where somebody with darker skin is referred to as exotic, which made me uncomfortable. And then there's also a blatant attempt by Tally to try to hurt Clay by saying she doesn't like men with darker skin. And it gets shot down pretty quickly, but I noted it made me uncomfortable. Again, I don't know if that would happen in a book written today, but yeah, I think, like I said, it's very clear that the posture of the series as a whole, with how interracial everybody is in terms of how we would understand the word interracial. Just everybody has, not everybody, but many people have very mixed origins and very ambiguous kind of racial presentation. So, and then also just with the, like I was saying earlier, this idea of like stronger together, when humanity is all working together. I don't think that that's the posture of the series as a whole. So I think of those moments where I feel uncomfortable with that as sort of just like misfires or just things that are tonally, they don't totally work for me. So that I think is most of what I had to say about this thematically. And then I guess we will start to transition into ratings. Okay, so for ratings, we'll start with cozy community vibes. I'm going to give this 6 out of 10 protective foretellings, because Faith Nightstar feels very protective over Clay, and she basically gives Tally sort of this telling her future where basically Clay has not yet become the person he's going to need to be to survive whatever is going to happen. And she sort of insinuates that Tally is doing something to keep him from getting there. So we definitely do have a lot of like interaction with the Dark River Pack in this one. I don't think it feels as cozy as some of the others, but we've got your Tammy and Nate moments. We've got your Sasha and Lucas coming in to, you know, kind of direct some of the action of the plot. We've got, like I said, Faith is very protective over Clay. We have Rhea coming back in the mix. We have Sean, who we've seen in some of the short stories. We get a lot of our old faves coming back into the mix. And then in terms of heat level, I'm going to give this 5 out of 10 I trust you enough to bangs. Because I just think with how much, like, the actual steamy scenes when they happen are good. You know, I believe the chemistry between them, but there's just so much discussion of trauma and assault in this one that I just don't think this feels like one of the sexier books. So I think if that's one of the things you like best about the series, to me, this isn't the one, like one of the ones that really deliver on that fully. In terms of political machinations, I'm going to give this a solid 8 out of 10 assassinated council members. I mean, we got Marshall dying, We've got Protocol 1, they're still trying to move that forward. We've got the new alliance with the rats. Yeah, I feel like there's a good amount of political machinations in this one that I found to be pretty satisfying. And then I'd also give this 8 out of 10 childhood mates lost and returned. I mean, this is a very angsty book. This has a lot of feelings, so I think if I can definitely see, because I've gotten several comments of people saying, oh, I know you said you didn't like 4 or 5, but I actually really, really like those. I think if you tend to like an angstier book with a more kind of traditional romance hero-heroine dynamic, I can see why this book would be really satisfying. That doesn't tend to be my favorite, which is a part of why I think I personally just don't love this one the way other people do. So yeah, but anyway, I do think it's very angsty. So if you like that, I think that this book will definitely deliver there. So with all that being said, I struggle to rate this one because I would give the first half of it like 2 stars and the back half of it like 4. So I guess that means I'll give it like a 3.5, somewhere in there. Again, if I'm comparing this to like almost anything else, I'd rather read this. But for like, if I'm rating it on the scale of what I know Nalini Singh can do, this one is not necessarily one of my very favorites. So I guess we'll just kind of leave it at that. But that was Mind to Possess. So we've got 4 main books down, but next week we are returning back to some of the novellas, and they were 2 novellas. I've already read them. I really enjoyed them. I just love Nalini Singh's novellas, especially in this particular series. So we have, I believe it's 2.5, which is Echo of Silence, and then 3.5 is Stroke of Enticement. One of them is a Psy and a human, and then one of them is a changeling and a human. So join me back for a kind of shorter episode on that here in 2 weeks. But until then, I hope you are enjoying your reread or your first read of the series with me. I have very much been enjoying this project. If you're enjoying the show, definitely rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. And yeah, I will see you guys back in 2 weeks for some novella fun times. I will catch you then. Bye!